This is the second muscle lecture, lecture 16, focusing on the muscles of the upper limb. Again, I like to look at this picture a lot because I think it's a great overview. Right now we're still up here. We're still just talking about gross anatomy of muscles. What can we see with our eye? But we don't want to forget that we will be going all the way down to the functioning unit of muscle contraction, the sarcomere. So we have a muscle. If we cut it in half, we see it's bundled together by connective tissue. Those connective tissue bundles are made up of muscle fibers. Muscle fibers are made up of myofibrils. Myofibrils contain the smallest unit of muscle contraction, which is a sarcomere. And a sarcomere is made up of the main proteins of muscle contraction, myosin and actin. So today we're going to be looking at the arm, the rotator cuff, the forearm, the muscles that go to your wrist and hand, the muscles that go to your fingers, and then finally the muscles of the anatomical snuff box. So the arm first. The muscles of the arm include pectoralis major, which we saw on the anterior thoracic wall, coracobrachialis, teres major, and the deltoid. So if we look on this picture, we see pectoralis major. Okay, that's the thick fan-shaped muscle. It is intrinsic to the arm, extrinsic to the anterior thoracic wall. Coracobrachialis. This is coming from the coracoid process onto brachialis. Brachialis, brachii means arm. And remember, your arm is from your shoulder to your elbow, so that corresponds to the humerus. From the anterior view, coracobrachialis just barely sneaks right around your armpit. Teres major, we will see on the next slide, and then the deltoid is what most people know as their shoulder muscle. Here's a picture of teres major. To orient us, there are some muscles on here we've already seen. Levator scapula and the rhomboids, rhomboid minor and rhomboid major. Here is teres major, okay, working in opposition to the rhomboid. Teres major comes from the scapula to the humerus. There is a teres minor, but teres minor is not intrinsic to the arm. It is smaller, and it also sits superior to teres major. We'll see it in the rotator cuff. So in the rotator cuff, we have four muscles. They help you to rotate your shoulder. There is no muscle called the rotator cuff. So when people complain that they've strained or inflamed their rotator cuff, they're talking about one or a group of muscles. These four muscles include supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. Again, remembering back to learning the parts of the scapula, we have those three fossas. We said if you remember the fossas, there was a muscle of the same name. And the supraspinous fossa is the supraspinatus muscle. And the infraspinous fossa is the infraspinous muscle. And the subscapular fossa is the subscapularis muscle. Now, when you look at the infraspinatus muscle, notice we're on the posterior shoulder. Here's teres minor. Okay, it runs right alongside of it. So make sure in this lecture and in lab you can distinguish the difference between infraspinatus muscle and teres minor. And teres major would sit right down here, but again, teres major is not part of the rotator cuff. If we look at the muscles that are responsible for flexion of the arm, remember going from 180 to 90, decreasing the angle between two bones is flexion. We have biceps brachii, which most people are familiar with their biceps muscle. Biceps means two-headed, brachii means arm. Okay, so when a muscle is two-headed, that means one part of the muscle splits off and has 2 points of insertion. Brachii means arm, so we would like to see it associated with the humerus. Brachialis is deep to biceps brachii, and in this picture we just see a little bit of it here. It is actually quite a large muscle, but you have to remove biceps brachii to see the majority of brachialis. Again, you have that brachii there, so it's going to associate with the humerus. Finally, brachioradialis. This word tells you where it's coming from and where it's going to. Brachii is arm, that's humerus. Radialis is radius. This is a muscle that crosses over the elbow joint from the humerus to the radius. And here's the indication of brachioradialis on the picture. Extending the arm. So after we have decreased the angle between two bones, we must increase it, and that's extension. So we have the main muscle that extends the arm, which is triceps brachii, located on the posterior of the arm. Biceps means 2 heads, triceps means 3 heads. Brachii is still relating to the humerus. Now you do need to know all 3 heads of triceps brachii. They are named lateral head, medial head, and long head. And if we look at this diagram, the medial head is the smallest and most medial. The long head is in the middle, and it's the longest. And then the lateral head is the most lateral. Okay, so they're all aptly named to describe their position. When we move to the forearm, okay, so your arm is from your shoulder to your elbow, your forearm is from your elbow to your wrist. We have pronator and a supinator muscle. Okay, remember, pronating helps the palms face the posterior. Supinating is when the palms face the anterior as an anatomical position. Pronator teres is a good landmark muscle in the forearm because while most of the muscles are running from the elbow to the wrist, pronator teres kind of runs diagonally across. So as you're learning the muscles of the forearm, pronator teres can be a good landmark, and it helps you, again, to turn your palms to the posterior. Supinator, there is a supinator muscle. Okay, but another muscle that we're going to be more familiar with that does help you to supinate is actually biceps brachii. So when you turn your palm to the anterior, if you put your other hand on biceps brachii, you will feel it contract. If we move into the wrist and the hand, these muscles appear in the forearm, but they are for flexing and extending the wrist and the hand. Flexors, the flexors of the forearm always appear in the anterior compartment. So any muscle that's going to be a flexor is going to be on the anterior. You have flexor carpi radialis, flexor carpi ulnaris, and palmaris longus. Now breaking these words down, flexor is going to indicate it's on the anterior forearm. Carpi is talking about going to the carpals in the wrist, and radialis is for the radius, so we know it's going to be on the thumb side. So if we look for flexor carpi radialis, it's right here. It's coming over to the thumb side. Flexor carpi ulnaris, same thing. Anterior part of the forearm going to the carpals in the wrist on the pinky side. Flexor carpi ulnaris is over here on the pinky side. And finally, palmaris longus sits right in between flexor carpi radialis and flexor carpi ulnaris. Palmaris longus indicating that it is longer and it goes into the palm of the hand. So right in the middle, we have one muscle coming past the wrist, extending into the palm of the hand, and that's palmaris longus. If we do extensors, we see extensor carpi radialis longus, and that should be GUS, extensor carpi radialis brevis, and extensor carpi ulnaris. Extensors of the wrist and hand are always located in the posterior compartment. So we have extensor, posterior compartment, carpi going to the carpals of the wrist, radius on the thumb side, longus. It's longer than its other counterpoint, brevis. If you practice brevity, you are being short, okay? Brevis is short. And then extensor carpi ulnaris on the pinky side. So here's the pinky. If we go to this large muscle right here, extensor carpi ulnaris. We're going to skip over extensor digitorum, and then we come right here to extensor carpi radialis brevis, extensor carpi radialis longus. Those are the 3 main extensors. If we look at flexors for the digits, okay, we're coming up into the fingers now. Flexor digitorum superficialis. Flexor indicates for us that it's in the anterior compartment. Digitorum means it goes to your 4 fingers or your digits. Superficialis is telling us it is a superficial flexor digitorum. And here's the top panel. It's flexor digitorum, and we see it going to all 4 digits. And it is the more superficial of the digitorums, okay, not of all the muscles. Extensors are going to indicate they're on the posterior compartment of the forearm. You have extensor digitorum communis, okay, which is right down the middle, extensor digitorum going to all 4 digits. And then you have extensor digiti minimi. And thank God for Austin Powers, because everybody remembers that mini-me goes to the pinky finger. Extensor indicis goes to the index finger. So in your fingers, you actually have more independent control over your index finger and your pinky finger because they have their own extensors. If we look finally at the anatomical snuff box, you'll notice that these are 3 muscles that go to the thumb. How do I know that they go to the thumb? By this word right here, pollicis. Pollicis means thumb. So anytime you see this word, it has to be going to the thumb. We have extensor pollicis brevis, so it extends the thumb and it is shorter. Extensor pollicis longus, so it extends the thumb and it's longer. And abductor pollicis longus. And if you remember the movement of abduction, which is away from the median line, that will explain where this muscle is located. So if we look at extensor pollicis brevis and extensor pollicis longus, just indicating that they are both in fact going to the thumb, and if we were to measure their length from origin to insertion, we would find that longus is longer and brevis is shorter. And then when we look at abductor pollicis longus, we see that it's coming out to the very median part of the thumb, and so when that muscle contracts, it moves the thumb away from the median line. These 3 muscles, why are they called the anatomical snuff box? Because at the base of your wrist, where these tendons come together, there is a small, flat divot. And when snuff used to be the habit of gentlemen, they would put a little bit of snuff on that flat area, and they would be able to easily snort it up their nose. So that's why that particular area gets to be called the anatomical snuff box. It's the 3 tendons coming from your thumb, provides a nice flat little shelf right there, which gentlemen used to play snuff in.